You know what I'm saying? I wasn't always being the kind of husband that you're supposed to be. That's just is what that is. You know, I've cheated. I've done things that husbands ain't supposed to do, and that's what eventually led to us talking about divorce.
Stopping a man from doing what a man wants to do, to each his own. Unfortunately, with infidelity, it's a very serious thing, and you either have to work through it.
Nothing is more humiliating for a man than catching his wife in the act of betrayal with his own eyes. No wealth, fame, or legendary voice is powerful enough to save him from that moment. There have been at least 21 black stars who conquered the stage and millions of hearts, but all of them collapsed in a single night. When the bedroom door opened, the woman they trusted most was trembling in another man's arms. And because they were music legends, they had to pour all their power, money, and pride into hiding that disgrace from the prying eyes of the media. From wild orgies in recording studios and luxury hotels to cold confessions on wedding beds, many legends bitterly discovered that the betrayer was the closest person, a brother who once swore loyalty unto death. Below is the list of affairs that tore marriages apart and buried the illustrious careers of countless black legends. 21. Johnny Taylor. Witnessing his wife in the arms of the manager. Johnny Taylor, the renowned soul singer celebrated as the Pharaoh of Soul, was once the embodiment of glamour, passion, and a marriage that seemed unbreakable. Throughout the 1970s, he and Gurlian Rocket Taylor, the gentle wife always at his side at every award ceremony, were hailed as Memphis's diamond couple. Yet behind the flashbulbs and the red carpets, cracks quietly spread, sinking them into a tragedy no one could have foreseen. It all started with endless nights on tour, 3 weeks without coming home, 4 weeks of complete silence. By late 1978, Johnny was drowning in alcohol and the attention of young female fans. He never realized that his cold absence had driven Gurlian to the edge of loneliness and into a silent affair. The man, a 27-year-old tour manager, planted the seeds of betrayal with sweet words and warm embraces, though no one could say exactly when it began. At dawn on May 4, 1980, after a show in Mobile, Alabama, was unexpectedly canceled, Johnny drove through the night back to Memphis. He wanted to surprise his wife, but fate had reserved the cruelest gift for him instead. At 2:17 a.m., the apartment door swung open, and the bedside lamp cast a gloomy yellow light across the living room. Johnny stopped right on the threshold. A heady men's cologne hung in the air, stabbing into his chest like a blade. A striped dress shirt, carelessly folded on the armchair, stood as shameless, irrefutable evidence. But none of it compared to what he saw behind the bedroom door left ajar. Johnny pushed it open. In that instant, time seemed to freeze. Gerlin lay curled under a thin sheet, her bare back half exposed in the lamplight. Her hand clutched the young manager's shoulder, their bodies entwined as if they had belonged to each other forever. Gurlian turned, her eyes wide with shock, before closing in weary surrender. Her voice came out hoarse, but firm as the final stroke of a blade. "You thought you could buy love? I've loved him for a long time." Johnny screamed, stepped toward the nightstand, picked up their faded wedding photo, and stared into the eyes of the man he once believed in, someone who thought love was eternal. Then he hurled the frame to the floor, glass exploding in a dry, shattering sound. Johnny turned his back. He drove straight to the Holiday Inn on Union Avenue, sat alone until sunrise, sipping cognac nonstop, trying to convince himself it was just a nightmare. But the next morning, May 5, 1980, when he called his lawyer to file for divorce, he knew it was all real. What followed was nothing but wreckage. In August 1980, he was forced to pay $250,000 in damages and surrender the Memphis house to Gurlian. Memphis newspapers gleefully splashed headlines, "Pharaoh of Soul Falls." Fans cursed him for failing to keep his family together. The tragedy didn't stop there. A November 1980 DNA test revealed a truth crueler than any slap. The youngest son wasn't his. Johnny broke down, plunged into heavy drinking, and nearly died of alcohol poisoning by the end of 1981. Because of his collapse, Columbia Records suspended his contract, and radio stations refused to play his new singles. Amid the extinguished stage lights, there was only Johnny, a man who once held both glory and happiness, now staggering through whispers of contempt, with nothing left but shame. 20. Teddy Pendergrass. The lace stockings in the Hilton parking lot. Now, let's return to the night of February 12, 1980. Teddy Pendergrass had just wrapped a sold-out concert in Philadelphia. It should have been the night he returned to his hotel room, peeled off his glittering suit jacket, and lay back, the applause still echoing in his hair. But sometimes life needs only a single moment to collapse completely. Around 11:20 p.m., Teddy walked across the Hilton Hotel parking lot, heading for his familiar Cadillac Fleetwood. From a distance, he noticed the interior light still glowing faintly. At first, he simply assumed Karen, the young wife more than 10 years his junior, was waiting to ride back to their room. But as he got closer, one detail sent an icy chill down his spine: a pair of black lace stockings dangling from the car door onto the cold concrete. Peering through the crack, he froze. Karen was straddling the tour manager's lap, their faces pressed together, the man's hand buried deep under her dress. They kissed as if the world had vanished, as if he had never existed. A fleeting moment, but enough for Teddy to understand he was being betrayed in the cruelest way. He threw the car door open. Karen burst into tears, mumbling apologies. He didn't bother listening. His voice came out raw. "Shut up. You've turned me into a damn clown in front of the whole crew." The entire parking lot fell silent as Teddy grabbed Karen and dragged her out of the car. Her dress slipped off her shoulder, exposing a swath of bare back. He picked up the red dress, threw it on the ground in front of her. Everyone then slammed the car door so hard the side mirror shattered. No one dared speak. No one knew what to say to a man who had just lost both his pride and his heart in mere minutes. 2 weeks later, Teddy filed for divorce. The press tripped over themselves to plaster the scandal across the headlines. Everyone talked, only he stayed silent, locking himself away in the hotel room. But that shock wasn't the end of his tragedy. On March 18, 1980, exactly 5 weeks after that parking lot night, Teddy drove his Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit through the rain. In the instant he lost control, he thought, "Maybe my life ended the night she betrayed me." The car smashed into a utility pole. When they pulled him out, his spine was shattered. From the chest down, he was never able to move again. The new album was canceled, promotional contracts collapsed, and his career fell into a desolate limbo. And so Karen disappeared from Teddy's life, leaving behind an emptiness nothing could ever fill, leaving a pain both searing and humiliating that he never forgot for the rest of his days. 19. James Brown, 7 seconds, catching his wife in bed with a dancer. Have you ever seen your lifelong dream collapse in 7 seconds? James Brown had, and it ruined him forever. Everyone knows the name James Brown, the godfather of funk, the man who turned the stage into his own kingdom with fiery dances and wild screams, who once believed no one could ever break him. But in the end, the wife he loved most turned that love into a stain he could never wash away. By the early 1980s, James was losing himself in painkillers and hard liquor. He disappeared for weeks, leaving Adrienne alone in hotels with the young dancers, and those empty nights were the seeds of betrayal. Rumors that she was holding midnight band meetings spread wider and wider, but James lied to himself that they were just spiteful gossip. Until 1:15 a.m. on April 14, 1981, after a show at Civic Center Augusta, James returned to the Marriott Hotel, alcohol burning in his throat. The dim yellow light under Adrienne's door and the disco music fading into silence killed his last hope. He gently tried the handle, but it was locked. Fury surged up, and James slammed his shoulder against the door, snapping the hinge clean off. The scene was clear as a cheap porno film. Adrienne, kneeling on the bed, white nightgown bunched around her waist, clutching the neck of a young dancer who was roaring in shock. The sheets were crumpled. An open bottle of Moët sat on the nightstand, 2 lipstick-smeared glasses standing there as mocking evidence. Worst of all, a pair of silver men's briefs lay tangled with a hotel bathrobe. James stood frozen for 7 seconds. Then he roared, his voice raw like a wounded animal. "Get the hell out of my bed!" He grabbed the champagne bottle and hurled it against the wall. Foam splattered everywhere, soaking Adrienne's hair and the filthy sheets. Without waiting for excuses, James walked out into the hallway, picked up the wall phone, and called his lawyer in Atlanta. File the divorce papers now and prepare a gag order for both of them. And so, in 1982, the bitter divorce was filed. He lost more than $600,000 and a house in South Carolina. Worse yet, the Atlanta Journal still ran stories about the mystery dancer, turning him into a laughingstock. In the following months, James drowned in liquor, repeatedly assaulted staff, and was arrested twice for attacking people. Even his own son turned on him, telling the papers, "He doesn't deserve to be called a man." The aura of the godfather of funk officially shattered when his shows were canceled, records flopped, and James had to organize emergency tours just to avoid bankruptcy. But the most painful part was that for the rest of his life, he never again trusted anyone completely. 18. Rick James, Orgy in the Studio, the most expensive shame. But James Brown's disgrace was nothing compared to Rick James, who walked into his own studio and caught the woman who swore to love him forever kneeling in the middle of a shameless orgy. It was 2 a.m. on September 19, 1982. After 3 nights high on drugs and drifting through Los Angeles, Rick staggered back to his private studio, intending to play a bass line that had popped into his mind. Even in his haze, he never imagined fate waiting behind that door. The moment he opened it, the stench of booze and sweat hit him like a punch. The room glowed in the dim yellow light of the still rolling video camera. Rick took a second to process what he was seeing, and that second broke the pride that had carried him through his entire career. On the gray velvet couch, where Rick had written the hit Super Freak, Tanya, his wife nearly 20 years younger, knelt between 2 naked dancers. One man gripped her shoulders from behind, the other yanked her hair, his mouth pressed to her neck with obscene hunger. Condoms littered the floor, a vodka bottle lay spilled across the mixing board, liquor seeping all the way to Rick's feet. He stood frozen, breathing hard. In his head, only one question rang. Is this real? But he didn't need more proof. When Tanya noticed him, she only managed to clutch a white towel over her chest. But Rick didn't let her speak. His voice ripped out, hoarse with rage. "What the hell are you doing in my studio?" Without waiting for an answer, Rick kicked over the control desk. The vodka bottle exploded, glass shards flying everywhere. All eyes turned to him, the man who had just lost every shred of dignity and trust. He spun around, bolted down to the parking lot, and headed for his Cadillac Eldorado, still misted with dew. Hands trembling, he pulled a metal suitcase from the trunk containing every contact and advance contract he'd ever signed. Tonight, he had no intention of giving anyone the chance to turn this humiliation into tabloid fodder. He grabbed the car phone and called Royce Lambert, his longtime tour manager, demanding he bring 2 bodyguards immediately. Around 3 a.m., Royce arrived with 2 large men in dark glasses. Upstairs, Tanya cowered in her towel, the 2 dancers staring at the floor in terror. Royce handed them a folder along with 3 checks for $75,000 each, an agreement of absolute silence. If any of them leaked a single detail about this night, they would be sued into ruin. Tanya shakily signed her name. Rick folded his arms, watching them leave the room, then sped into the night. From that night on, he never again called Tanya by her name, only referring to her as that expensive mistake. On tour, Rick still wore his sparkling suits and smiled at crowds, but inside was a void nothing could fill. He knew perfectly well all the drugs and parties were just temporary anesthesia. The wound of betrayal was carved forever into his heart, leaving a smoldering shame no silence clause could erase. And Rick James never truly forgot that night. 17. Marvin Gaye. A wife, betraying him with the man who used to insult him. If you ever thought Teddy Pendergrass dragging his wife out of a limousine or Rick James catching an orgy in his own studio was the peak of humiliation, then Marvin Gaye's story leaves a different, bitter aftertaste. The legendary voice behind Let's Get It On, who once stood atop Motown as both a soul icon and a man who seemed to have fame and power in his grasp, found that even he was not immune. When he married Anna Gordy, sister of the label's owner, every magazine praised them as the golden couple, a perfect union between music and the entertainment empire. But behind those glamorous photos, the truth was far more complicated. Starting in 1973, Marvin spiraled into uncontrollable addiction. Endless drunken nights turned him from tender to violently jealous. Anna, exhausted from the insults and the constant surveillance, began seeking comfort in the arms of a young guitarist who couldn't even hide his contempt. He once told the entire recording crew that Marvin was just a washed-up junkie. On the night of September 15, 1975, after a tense recording session, Marvin drove back to his private Sunset Boulevard studio. As he climbed the steps, he noticed the studio door wasn't locked. A thin crack let out the sound of soul music mingled with drunken laughter. He pushed the door open, and in that moment, everything froze. Anna was sitting on her lover's lap, her dress hiked up her thighs, one hand stroking his hair, kissing him with a passion as if she had never loved anyone else. Marvin stood silent for several seconds, then, without a word, picked up a beer can from the table and hurled it against the wall. White foam sprayed over Anna's hair and shoulders, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence. Then he simply turned around and walked out, slamming the door behind him as if closing the chapter for good. The bitter divorce wasn't finalized until April 1976, forcing Marvin to surrender all the royalties from his next album to cover alimony debts. Rumors of the man who got cuckolded in his own studio spread across Motown, pushing him deeper into cocaine and despair. In the end, Marvin locked himself in the studio for weeks, recording "Here, My Dear," a scathing indictment so raw that no one recognized the artist who once sang about tender love. 16. Miles Davis, a jazz legend whose young protege stole his wife. There are moments that happen in silence but destroy a life louder than any music. On the night of November 12, 1968, Miles Davis returned to his apartment on Central Park West with a heart already cracked, not knowing that just minutes later it would truly shatter. He was a jazz genius, the man who rewrote the language of the trumpet in Kinda Blue and turned cramped stages into legends. But no concert hall could teach him how to endure betrayal. For months before that, he had left Frances Taylor in solitude, too busy escaping his life with drugs and endless tours. Frances, the woman who once abandoned the peak of Broadway just to be his wife, was too exhausted to believe this love could be saved. And Thomas Reed, the young dancer whom Miles himself introduced, appeared as a cruel release. When Miles placed his hand on the doorknob to the bedroom, he only thought he'd find Frances reading, waiting for him as always. But the slightly open door revealed a scene so brutal he almost couldn't breathe. The familiar size 12 dance shoes rested on the rug's threshold, the dim yellow nightlight cast upon Frances's body, her slip half down her hips. Thomas bent close, his lips near her shoulder, his hand sliding behind her neck to caress her hair. Everything was deathly silent, like a mute film scene staged to humiliate him. In that moment, Miles walked straight into the room, grabbed the brass table lamp, and threw it so hard the wardrobe shattered, shards of glass tinkling at Thomas's feet. Then he turned away, not saying a single word, leaving Frances kneeling on the bed, her face pale, watching him through the faint light. After that night, Francis moved out of the apartment, leaving a chilling void that stretched through the rest of Miles's life. He stopped performing for 3 months, locked himself in his studio, sinking deeper into heroin as if only drugs could mask the humiliation. Rumors of the jazz legend whose wife was stolen by a young protege spread across New York, collapsing the last shred of dignity he clung to. Later, when asked why he couldn't forgive, Miles only said one sentence: "I was never afraid of losing anyone until that night." And without another word, everyone understood that the moment the lamp shattered was the moment his heart stopped believing in anything called love. 15. Barry White turned into a spectacle in his own room. Imagine a man whose voice once melted millions of women's hearts, walking into his private room at midnight and discovering he was merely a spectacle in his own home. On the night of August 14, 1982, Barry White, the soul king with a velvety deep voice, would never erase that horrific image from his mind. At that time, Barry had just finished a series of shows in London, his mind only on his bed and the ledger he needed to review. For years, he and Glodon James were not just husband and wife, but a powerful couple at Motown. They sang together, managed together, and argued together. But who knew his own study, where he kept his safe and secret recordings, would become the place where all masks fell. At 12:45 a.m., he pushed open the door. The desk lamp illuminated an unbelievable scene. Glodon sat on the edge of the desk, wearing a wide white shirt that Barry immediately recognized as belonging to Kevin Ross, his personal manager, whom he both trusted and disdained. Her bare legs were resting on Kevin's lap, while he leaned close, still holding a pen, signing a check. Each drop of ink spreading on the paper as if drowning the remnants of Barry's self-respect. That humiliating scene didn't happen in bed. There were no torn nightgowns, but a moment of signing a check, dividing money that Barry had sweated to earn. He looked straight into Kevin's eyes, then bent down to pick up a condom wrapper that had fallen from a drawer. Beside it was a bottle of Calvin Klein cologne he used to mock as cheap stuff. Barry immediately snatched the check from the man's hand, stared intently at the forged signature, then threw the paper hard onto the desk. Before leaving, he quietly picked up their wedding album, folded it shut, clutching it under his arm as if holding on to the last shred of his dignity. A few months later, Glodon publicly dated Kevin. Meanwhile, the betrayed man plunged into an abyss as promotional contracts were canceled and his European tour collapsed. Barry spiraled into depression and gained almost 50 pounds. The press called it Motown's most humiliating spectacle, as the man who once conquered millions of hearts ultimately couldn't keep one woman and one room to himself. 14. Isaac Hayes, cheated on during his tour. Isaac Hayes, the king of Memphis soul and owner of a voice that captivated millions in the 70s. He was always admired not only for his music, but also for his seemingly rock-solid marriage to Mignon Harley Hayes, his trusted wife and backstage manager. But on the night of March 16, 1973, when Isaac returned to the Statler Hilton Detroit Hotel at 12:20 a.m., all that trust shattered the moment he pushed open his room door. Before him, 2 concert tickets he himself had signed lay scattered on the floor next to the velvet wine-colored jacket of Jerome, the guitarist he once considered a brother. The air was thick with the scent of brandy, cigarette butts, and the silence that signaled betrayal. On the sofa, Mignon knelt, her thin nightgown slipped to her hips, her hair disheveled, while Jerome leaned close, kissing, her neck, his hand, holding an unsigned check. From the cassette player in the room, Isaac's own voice echoed, singing "Walk On By," a song he had written for his wife, now a bitter soundtrack to his utter humiliation. Mignon looked up, her voice trembling but cold. "You can write 100 songs, but you can't write one warm night." Isaac roared, stepped forward, pulled open a drawer, and tore a thick tour contract in half, leaving it on the floor as a declaration of the end. 2 months later, Mignon moved out, and rumors of Isaac Hayes cheated on in his tour hotel spread across Memphis, plunging him into depression, causing him to abandon a new album and cut contact with his band for 6 months. His career plummeted, revenue dropped 40%, and his family shattered when his daughter decided to disown her mother forever. 13. David Ruffin, a strange robe on the bed and a lifelong stain. On the night of November 22, 1969, David Ruffin, the golden voice of the Temptations, a 60s soul icon, and the singer of the immortal My Girl, returned to his Detroit apartment after losing a poker game and almost finishing a bottle of whiskey. He could not have known that just a few more steps would bring his life crashing down. As he opened the door, he saw a gray men's bathrobe hanging loosely on the doorknob, and an unfamiliar cigarette smell hit him directly. On the dressing table, a torn condom wrapper lay amidst Jenna's makeup. When he pushed open the bedroom door, the sight made him freeze. Jenna sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a bathrobe that wasn't her husband's, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide with panic. Beside her, the young drummer of the Temptations, whom David once considered a younger brother. The young man's head was bowed, his hands trembling as he rebuttoned his pants. Without a word, David turned away, letting the whiskey bottle fall and shatter on the floor. More heartbreakingly, later that year, he was fired from the band, spiraled into addiction and depression, forever bearing the shame of being cheated on in his own bedroom. 12. Curtis Mayfield, The Secret Moment. Backstage at Soul Train, Curtis Mayfield, celebrated as the conscience of American soul, learned that even a genius is not immune to the stain of betrayal. On the night of September 12, 1975, backstage at the Soul Train show, he walked in just as he saw his wife standing close to a young saxophone player who had recently joined the band. The man's hand slid along the back of her dress while she whispered something that made them both laugh, unaware that Curtis stood less than 3 meters away. An assistant recounted that he just froze, his face pale, then placed his handkerchief on the makeup table, saying softly, "You know what you're doing." Then he turned and walked away, leaving behind the confused stares of the crew. After that night, Curtis canceled 3 shows in New Orleans, losing almost $80,000 USD in deposits. Although they never publicly divorced, friends said they slept in separate rooms for the last 12 years of his life. When Curtis became paralyzed after a stage accident in 1990, his wife remained by his side, but no one ever heard them speak of that night backstage, as if it were a silent wound no one dared to uncover. 11. Bobby Womack, A Hotel Bill, exposed the affair. For Bobby Womack, the tragedy didn't stop at just one affair. In 1970, after the scandal of his relationship with his wife's stepdaughter was exposed, he thought he had hit rock bottom. But just 2 months later, Barbara Cooke revealed new evidence. A hotel bill from Chicago, clearly showing room suite 503, had been rented by Bobby for 2 nights with a young female tour manager 15 years his junior. During the confrontation, Barbara threw the stack of papers onto the floor, asking him how many more times he would lie. Bobby screamed denials, but she just gave a tired smile, then pulled a small handgun from the wardrobe. Friends had to hold her hand for nearly 20 minutes to persuade her to drop the weapon. Just 3 days later, Barbara filed for divorce, demanding $250,000 USD in compensation, a huge sum at the time. Bobby was cut from performance contracts by the Temptations and Motown, losing nearly 70% of his income in 1971. The incident was directly labeled by the press as Bobby Womack's most shameful career stain. 10. Ray Charles, the blind genius, betrayed in silence. Perhaps no one understood the cruelty of betrayal more than the men who once believed their voices could save every heart. Ray Charles, the blind genius who captivated millions of listeners, was the first to bow before a harsh truth. In the late 1960s, he returned to Georgia after a long tour, planning to surprise his wife and children. But that night, As Ray's hand felt along the familiar railing, he heard strange laughter coming from the living room. In the dim yellow light, Della sat on the armchair, her dress pulled up over her knees, her hand tightly clasped by a young man Ray had never heard of. People say he didn't get angry. He just stood still like a blind statue, then slowly turned away, closing the door behind him. The next morning, they and their lawyers divided over $500,000 USD in assets and 3 houses. No one cried, no one blamed, but from then on, Ray never mentioned Della's name again. He told a friend, "The most painful thing isn't not seeing, but clearly hearing your heart shatter." 9. Smokey Robinson. The champagne glass and the hand on his wife's thigh. A few years later, Smokey Robinson, Motown's sweetest voice, also realized he had been mistaken about happiness. In the early 1980s, rumors began to spread that Claudette, his wife and companion throughout their golden age, was getting too close to the Miracles drummer. Late one evening, Smokey decided to see for himself. As he gently pushed open the dressing room door, he saw Claudette sitting on the makeup table, her red velvet dress pulled high over her thighs, the young drummer close by, one hand on her knee, the other raising a champagne glass. Their quiet laughter echoed, making Smokey feel as if someone had punched him directly in the chest. He didn't step in, he just closed the door, then drove all night through the damp, cold streets of Detroit. After that night, they lived together for another 4 years, without arguments, but also without intimacy. One rainy afternoon, Claudette quietly left the house, once filled with memories. In his memoir, Smokey admitted, "I could write hundreds of love songs, but I didn't have the courage to keep that woman." 8. Sam Cooke had to hire a private investigator to follow his wife. Then it was Sam Cooke's turn, the man who once laughed arrogantly before crowds and believed fame was an absolute shield. But around 1963, his long nights away from home forced him to hire a private investigator, a $2,000 USD fee just to learn the painful truth he had already guessed. After a month of surveillance, the detective handed him an envelope containing the only photo he needed to see. Barbara, wearing a cream-colored fur coat, holding a Chicago hotel room key. Beside her was the tour manager, whom Sam once considered a brother. That night, he sat alone in the recording studio, lights off, a cigarette smoldering in his hand, listening repeatedly to the recording of "Bring It On Home to Me." From that day until Sam was shot dead in 1964, their marriage was merely a silent torment as they shared beds, shared kitchens, and shared a humiliation no one dared to name. Friends recounted Barbara sobbing uncontrollably at the funeral, but no one was sure if those were tears of sorrow or belated regret. 7. Bill Withers. The cruise tickets and the trust-killing words. But perhaps no tragedy is more bitter than being betrayed by your closest friend. Bill Withers, the street sweeper who found fame with Ain't No Sunshine, still believed that Denise Nicholas, the Emmy-winning actress, was a miracle he didn't deserve. But behind the success, the wealth gap reappeared. On nights when Bill recorded "Justments to Exhaustion," Denise disappeared from home. On the morning of May 21, 1974, Bill went to his lawyer's office to sign papers transferring the rights to a song he intended to leave to his son. The slightly ajar door revealed a chilling scene. Denise sat on an ebony table, her silk dress casually draped, her leg hooked over Leonard's back. That was the very lawyer who had helped Bill escape poverty. Beside them were a bottle of Dom Perignon, a silver ring box engraved with the words "Forever," and 2 Caribbean cruise tickets dated for their wedding anniversary. Denise wasn't startled. She just said softly, "You're not enough for me to reject a real man." Bill put his pen down on the table and left. After the divorce, he drank until his liver swelled, then wrote "Use me" as his final testament. Later, when Denise remarried and Leonard went bankrupt, Bill still rested his head on his old manuscript, bitterly whispering, "You weren't good enough." 6. Eddie Kendricks. When fans turn their backs on an idol. If Bill Withers crumbled upon seeing his wife sign cruise tickets with another man, Eddie Kendricks, the angelic voice of the Temptations, experienced humiliation in a place he always thought was safe territory, the fan club office he himself established to take care of his fans. On the afternoon of August 3, 1970, Eddie quietly returned to Detroit, intending to personally sign thank you letters for sick young fans. The door swung open, and before him was a scene like a cold knife. Patricia, wearing a short blue dress, sat sprawled on the reception desk, her hand clasped around the neck of the fan club manager, a devoted fan who had quietly wept upon meeting Eddie. On the floor, a stack of fan letters lay, topped by a Polaroid photo of Patricia sitting in the man's lap, her dress pulled up to her thighs, with a giant poster of Eddie's face behind them. Patricia looked back, her voice disdainful. "You're just their illusion, but I need a real man." Eddie placed the pen engraved with his name on the table, then walked away amidst suffocating laughter. Weeks later, he announced his departure from the Temptations, locking himself in his dark apartment for months. No newspaper ever wrote the real reason why that golden voice quietly disappeared. 5. Gil Scott-Heron, The Kiss on the Sidewalk. But Eddie's tragedy was just a prelude to Gil Scott-Heron's greater humiliation. As the father of spoken word, Gil Scott-Heron always placed his trust in his long-term partner, Brenda. She was a social journalist, the only one who understood her husband's loneliness and quiet addiction. In October 1980, after launching an anti-drug campaign, Gil drove past a New York newsroom. In the parking lot, Brenda's blue Plymouth was quietly parked. From the driver's seat, Gil saw a crumpled manuscript of an article that had smeared him as a pompous hypocrite. But on top of it was a fresh note with only one scrawled line. "My love, I'm coming over tonight." He didn't need to step inside. From the opposite sidewalk, Gil watched Brenda rest her head on the shoulder of the very editor who had humiliated him for years. She wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him so long that passers-by turned to stare. He quietly sat down on the curb, pulled out his notebook, his hand trembling so much he almost dropped his pen. As the streetlight swept across his face, Gil understood. Tonight, he had lost everything. And that was the first night he wrote The Bottle. 4. Chuck Berry, The Motel Notebook. Detailing the flings. Perhaps Gil Scott-Heron understood what it meant to lose face on a rainy New York night, but Chuck Berry experienced humiliation in a much quieter, yet far more brutal way. On the night of September 12, 1969, after the final applause at the Nashville Municipal Auditorium, he retreated backstage, still holding a broken guitar string. Through the stage curtain's gap, he saw his wife, Thametta, arm in arm with the new bass player who had just joined the band. He was a young man, almost 20 years her junior, who once bowed to Chuck Berry like an idol. They didn't kiss, didn't touch lips. They just walked shoulder to shoulder towards the parking lot. Moments later, in his dressing room, Chuck opened his wife's suitcase, finding a brown-covered notebook, inside listing dates and motel addresses starting from April 2, 1969, the day he had just completed a European tour. He didn't question her, didn't confront her, because deep down, he feared a cruel truth. In the years that followed, Chuck installed hidden cameras throughout his recording studio, confined himself to his tour bus, and never let anyone truly get close again. Until his final days, he would mumble one sentence to an old bandmate. "I'm not sure where they went that night, but it definitely wasn't back to me." 3. Luther Ingram, his wife's plea for forgiveness. After an affair with a pastor, Luther Ingram didn't witness a blatant affair, but what he saw was enough to kill a heart. On the night of March 4, 1977, Luther drove back to Memphis after 3 exhausting weeks on tour. At 3 in the morning, he pushed open the door to his wooden house, hoping his wife would wake up and embrace him as usual. Instead, he heard a man's soft singing in the bedroom, a chorus of a song Luther himself had written for their wedding day. Through the slightly ajar door, his wife sat on the edge of the bed, her hand clasped tightly by the local pastor, the very man who had blessed their union. On their laps, an open Bible, underneath which lay a crumpled piece of paper with a scrawled line. "Please forgive me. March 4th, 1977. Luther stood there for a long time, then quietly closed the door. The next morning, he drove to the studio writing "If Loving You Is Wrong" in just 3 hours. For the rest of his life, he never spoke of that night, and no one dared to ask why, of all Luther's songs, that one alone had no dedication. Near his death, he simply said, "There are things forgiveness cannot save." 2. Otis Redding, carrying the secret of betrayal to the grave. There are pains one must carry to the grave without ever asking a word. For Otis Redding, it wasn't a blatant caught-in-the-act scene, but the moment he understood he had become an outsider in the life of the woman he loved most. On the night of October 14, 1966, after 7 hours of driving from Georgia to Memphis, Otis stood silently in the recording studio hallway, looking through the brightly lit control room glass. In the yellow light, his wife sat on the leather chair, her head resting on the shoulder of a young piano player, whom he once considered a protege. They didn't kiss, didn't touch lips, they just held hands tightly over a sheet music of "These Arms of Mine," the very song Otis wrote for his wife the year they married. On the edge of the paper, strange handwriting scrawled, "Take 3, for us, 10/14/1966. Everything Otis had ever believed about fidelity vanished in that instant. He didn't bang on the door, didn't confront them, just watched for a few more seconds, then quietly closed the door so they wouldn't know he had just witnessed everything. 3 months later, on December 10, 1967, the plane carrying him on tour crashed into a frozen lake, claiming his life at just 26 years old. In his suitcase found in the wreckage, there was an unsealed envelope. Inside, not a single word of blame, just 4 trembling words written diagonally in blue ink. I knew everything. 1. Wilson Pickett, the Soul King, humiliated by a cassette tape. And finally, if all those previous humiliations still left a shred of self-respect, then Wilson Pickett, the fierce Soul King, the voice that ignited stages with "In the Midnight Hour," bowed his head before a small cassette tape, more damning than any rumor. On the night of November 2, 1974, he drove all night from Dallas to Nashville, exhausted after 3 weeks on tour, hoping to see his wife waiting on the sofa, as always. But as he opened the door, the desk lamp cast light upon a naked scene. Lucille huddled in a nightgown, tightly clutching an old cassette player, emitting a young man's husky, alcohol-laced laughter. On the coffee table, a strange gray shirt lay next to an empty vodka bottle, and scattered on the floor were crumpled love letters. Among them were sealed envelopes Wilson had written when he was poor. He didn't ask anything, just bent down and picked up the tape, stuffing it into his chest pocket. The next morning, Wilson left Nashville, abandoning a soon-to-be signed contract and a band waiting in vain. After that agonizing night, Wilson Pickett vanished for weeks, leaving recording contracts stalled and divorce rumors spreading across Nashville. Not long after, Lucille filed for divorce, divided assets, and left the apartment they once called home. In the years that followed, he spiraled into alcoholism and brawls. His career slowly faded, leaving him at the end of his life with only an old cassette tape bearing his wife's name, a testament to a shame no one dared to mention. So after all these heartbreaking stories we've journeyed through, do you realize something? It turns out, behind the success, these legends were still just lonely men, betrayed by those they trusted most. They hid that humiliation for decades so the public only saw the glory, unaware of how their hearts had shattered. The bitter divorces, alcoholism, depression, and ruined careers all began the moment a bedroom door slightly opened. If any truth in today's video has shocked you, please leave your thoughts in the comment section below.